Okay, so we don't have to guess what the inverse function is and try to figure it out. It turns out that we could find it algebraically. And there's kind of a procedure for it. So we're going to start off with f of x is 2x plus 5. And I'm going to demonstrate the procedure of finding the inverse function of f. So the first step is we're just going to write the f of x as y. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to switch the x and the y's. So instead of y, we're going to write x. And we keep it, otherwise we keep it exactly the same. And then what we do is we actually rearrange the equation to get the y alone. So we're going to bring the 5 to the other side. So we get x minus 5 equals 2y. And then what we do is we divide both sides by 2. Chink, chink. So y is x minus 5 over 2. And then finally what we do is we, instead of y, we write it as inverse function. And so it becomes the inverse function of x is x minus 5 over 2. And we tested a random point. So let's say I took 7. So I plug 7 into there. I get 2 times 7 is 14 plus 5 is 19. So that means that technically with this one, if I plug in 19, I should end up with 7. If I plug in 19, I get 19 minus 5 is 14. 14 divided by 2 is 7. I mean, that doesn't prove it, but that's a good hint that we're probably on the right track. Let's just try another one quickly. So same idea. We'll write this as y equals 5 minus 7x over 3. We switch the x and the y's. So 5 minus 7y over 3. And then what happens is, so we're going to multiply both sides by 3. Bring that up there. I'm going to bring the 7y to this side, bring the 3x to this side. Things become positive. And divide by 7. And I get y is 5 plus 3x over 7. Which, if I'm going to write as my inverse function, I would get g to the minus 1x, because I want to match the letter, 5 minus 7x over 3, and I usually like to write it with the x first, but it doesn't matter, is 3x plus 5 over 7. That was kind of the same, so I'm going to jump right to this one over here. So what we have here is j of x is x squared minus 9. We have so y equals x squared minus 9. Switch the x and the y's. X equals y squared minus 9. Bring the 9 to this side. X plus 9 equals y squared. And at this point, what are we going to do? We're going to actually take the square root of both sides. Now, when we do that, we have to be careful, because when you take the square root now, you actually have the plus or minus square root. So it's actually plus or minus the square root of x plus 9. And that's our answer. So it's going to be the inverse function of, it's j. The inverse function of j is going to be plus or minus the square root of x plus 9. I'm going to talk about that briefly, just what does that represent in terms of, let's take a look at the graph. So we'll sketch it. So we know that j of x was x squared minus 9, which is minus 9, and it's going to look something like this. So it's a parabola. Now what we have here, we found that the inverse function was plus or minus root x plus 9, which is essentially two equations, really. So what we have is we have the plus root x plus 9, and we have the minus root x plus 9. So plus root x plus 9, it's the square root graph. It's moved 9 to the left. So that's going to look something like this. And the negative x plus 9, oh, I did the wrong one. That should have been the red one. That's the plus. And the negative one has been flipped over, and it looks something like this. And it may not be totally to scale. But the idea is, again, that this is flipped over the y equals x line, which looks about right. Should we do one more? Fine. We'll squish one more in. Let's find the inverse function of this one over here. So we have y equals 2 x minus 3 squared plus 11. Switch the x and the y's. X equals 2 y minus 3 squared plus 11. Then what we do is we isolate the y. And we're going to bring the 11 over first. X minus 11 is 2 times y minus 3 squared. Then we divide both sides by the 2. We kind of take the stuff that's farther away from the y first. Chink, chink. X minus 11 over 2 is y minus 3 squared. Then we are going to square root both sides with a plus or minus over there. So we end up with plus or minus the square root of x minus 11 over 2 equals y minus 3. Then we bring the 3 over. That's going to go on to the next page. So we bring the 3 over, we're going to get positive 3. So it's going to be 3 plus or minus the square root of x minus 11 over 2 equals y. Or to write it another way, I could say that y equals plus or minus the square root of x minus 11 over 2 and the square root plus 3, which I should probably write as the inverse function. So inverse function is plus or minus the square root of x minus 11 over 2 plus 3. And that was the inverse function of 2 times x minus 3 squared plus 11. That's all.